Those are my cats. Hello everyone! It is that time of year for the first time ever on YouTube where I'm going to do a reading wrap-up for the year where I talk about books that I read. But these are books that I didn't enjoy. I read about 23 books total this year, and I had to get pretty picky when I was making this list, but there were 3 that I just was not really impressed with. So I'm gonna complain about them to you today. This list was actually really difficult for me to put together because I enjoyed a lot of the things that I read. I generally enjoy most books that I read. I think I'm pretty good at picking books that I like, and I rarely give out 3 out of 5 stars or less when it comes to books. Even if I don't love a book, I can usually pick out a few things that I can appreciate about something that I read. And I also learned this year that I need to just not read books if I'm really not enjoying them. And one of the books that I talk about on this list is actually the book that was the catalyst for me deciding that I needed to DNF books if I was not enjoying them. Because one of these books took me quite a while to read because I was not vibing with it. And I will just kind of discuss that with y'all later. This video is completely spoiler free. When I talk about these 3 books that I didn't enjoy very much, I'm going to list them in order of like most enjoyed to least enjoyed, and while these were my least favorite reads, think of it as like, this book was alright but I really didn't like it that much, to like, I think I hated this book, right? So before I get into it, I just want to go ahead and say that these are my personal opinions. I am not like some almighty reviewer, critic of things. There are some things that I love that a lot of people hate, and then there are a lot of things that I hate that a lot of people love, and that is the beauty of media. We can consume what we like or what we don't like, and it's fine. We all have different opinions with most things. I do want to preface this by saying I do not list trigger warnings for any of these, because to me, reading about a trigger warning can often be a spoiler in its own. That's just my personal opinion, but I will warn all of you that several of these books, there's 3. 2 of these books do have a lot of triggers in them. In fact, one of them is just like one long trigger warning, basically. So I do want to let you all know that, so that if you do want to read any of these, you can look up the trigger warnings for yourself. At the end of the day, I don't want to accidentally traumatize anybody because of these books. Like, I don't want someone to go and read one of these and be like, wow, that person just ruined my life. They didn't warn me that it's got this, 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 and this in it. So, you know, just to be fair, there are triggers. Please look them up if that's something that you would like to know before reading a book. So, I guess let's just go ahead and get into it. I just want to go ahead and apologize. The colors in this video, like the lighting, is probably going to be off throughout the video. I don't have a ring light yet. I'm waiting for that to come in the mail at some point, and I am filming from my office, obviously, in front of a window. It was really bright when I started filming, and then it got really, really dark. Like, it was so bright I couldn't have like my headlight on, and the clouds came out because why wouldn't they? I'm in the Pacific Northwest. And I realized, partially through filming this, that I needed to turn the light on, so if the lighting is all weird, it probably bothers me more than it bothers any of you. But, sorry. So the first book on my list is a book that I'm a little sad to talk about because it was a book that I thought I was really going to love, and it also happens to be by one of my favorite authors at this moment. And that book is The Deep by Nick Cutter. I gave this book a 3 out of 5 star rating, and that was a fairly generous rating from me. I probably could have picked it apart a little bit more and given it a 2.5 out of 5 stars, but I did find some redeeming qualities to it, even though it really wasn't what I was hoping for or something that I enjoyed thoroughly. The Deep is a book that was published in 2015, and it is about a plague known as the Gets that is essentially wiping humanity out. Like, things are in turmoil, tons of people have died, scientists, the government, all over the world, everyone's trying to figure out ways to survive this or find a cure, and that is just not happening. The way that the Gets affects people and causes their death is that it starts out by causing people to forget things. And it's little things at first, like you know, forgetting what you were doing when you walked into a room. Like, oh, what was I gonna do in here? Why'd I even walk in here? I don't know. And, you know, little things like that. Then it progresses to forgetting more important things. Suddenly you're forgetting your name, you're forgetting your spouse's name, you're forgetting where you work. And it does progress to the point where your body basically, you forget how to function entirely, to the point where it causes your death. Your body literally isn't doing its normal functions at all, and it sucks. It's really bad. Like, if you gets the Gets, you're gonna have a bad time. So our main character, whose name I have completely forgotten, I am so sorry, he is the brother of one of the leading scientific minds in the world. His brother is like a top-notch scientist. He's a genius. And if you've read Nick Cutter's other book, The Troop, you know that sometimes really smart scientists aren't always working with us. Just putting that out there. He's a weirdo. He's a weirdo, okay? His brother's weird. And some scientists have found a possible cure, a substance that they've labeled ambrosia. They found it, like, near the Marianas Trench, like deep down in the Marianas Trench, right? The deep down. A research lab facility has been built like 8 miles down underneath the ocean so that main dude's brother and a couple other scientists can go down and hopefully find ways to turn this ambrosia into a cure so that the Gets doesn't kill everybody. Unfortunately, something happens and the government or the powers that be or whomever is overseeing this research, they lose contact with the 3 scientists that are down in this research lab. They can't access the security cameras. There's no more regular calls that had been scheduled and going previously, and they're worried, right? Because humanity's dying. They can't talk to these scientists, and they're way down in the ocean, basically. They don't know if they're alive or dead or what. That is where the main character is called upon, because they want him to travel down into the ocean and go to this research facility and hopefully talk to his brother, or figure out not only what's going on inside the lab, but also see if there's any news on the ambrosia, any developments. And our wonderful, poor main character is dragged into this. He has no idea what to expect for humanity, or what to expect from his brother, or what to expect in the deep of the ocean. I read this book because I had heard about it on Horror Book Talk, which is something that people will probably hear me say frequently in these videos. I find a lot of books through Horror Book Talk, and I just like to take a chance with a lot of them. So I had seen it on people's lists of one of my top 5 favorite horror books of all time, or one of the scariest, most messed up horror books I'd ever read. Naturally, I was intrigued. So I went and bought this book back in, I think, June or July of 2022. It sat on my shelf for a while. I ended up reading The Troop before I read this book, and The Troop, I'll talk about The Troop in another video, but it really had me very enthusiastic about Nick Cutter's writing. I really like his writing. A few months ago, I couldn't decide on a book to read, so I grabbed 4 horror books off my shelf, and I took them to my boyfriend, who does not read horror at all. He does not usually watch any horror at all. It's not his genre, but I was like, hey, read the back of these and pick one for me, please. And he ended up picking The Deep. So I was like, all right, it's been decided. I'm gonna read this book that's probably gonna scare the living hell out of me. So these are the reasons why I did not enjoy this book. The biggest reason for me was the plot. Which I hate to say that because I love Nick Cutter's writing. I think he is a horror genius. If I could write even half as well as he does, in my mind, my life would be set, basically. This was like a great idea for a plot to me. I went into it expecting to be just like completely blown away. I thought that it was something that was genuinely going to scare me because like the ocean is one of my biggest fears. I rarely, if ever, watch movies involving the ocean. I will not play video games that involve the ocean and underwater activity. Like, I sat through a week of Shark Week once and was surprised that I hadn't passed out and peed my pants. The plot for this fell so short for me that it wasn't even that scary of a book, like, at all. I was really disappointed by that, and I know that a lot of people have found this book to be really scary and that it is still very popular, and I am glad about that. Like, I'm happy for Nick Cutter that other people enjoyed this book. I just didn't. The first half of the book, I was like, alright, this is good. It's not scary yet, but this is good. And then the second half of the book, I was just like, this is not my thing. I'm not impressed. It almost felt like kind of sloppy. I don't know. I can't think of another adjective to describe how I felt about the second half of the book and the ending and everything. Like, it just didn't hit for me personally. I will say that if any of the events that were in the deep occurred in real life, I would find it terrifying, but the book itself just could not draw me in enough to really feel any fear. The scariest part of the book to me was when the main character and another character were traveling down into the deep of the ocean to get to the research lab, and a giant squid kind of like attacks their like little vessel that they're in for a minute. That freaked me out. Giant squids are a no-no for me. Underwater sea creatures are a no. I'm not into that. That freaked me out. But that was it. That was like the only thing that scared me. I will say that Nick Cutter did deliver exactly what I had expected from him in terms of his like descriptive imagery. The way that he writes things, he is so good when it comes to body horror and just disgusting, nasty, horrific things. So that part of the book did hit home for me. Like, there were some things where I was like, ew, and I still think about, like, those things stuck with me. They didn't necessarily scare me or creep me out, but I was impressed. Again, he's an amazing writer. If you're really into really gross horror and you haven't read his stuff yet, I highly recommend checking it out. He has a handful of books out, and what I've read so far was impressive when it came to the writing. Just for the deep, the plot was not for me. And that's okay. I don't like the ocean anyways, so whatever, you know? The second book that I'm going to talk about, I don't think it's going to be a surprise to anybody who has read it that this is a book that I did not enjoy. And that book is Gone to See the Riverman by Christopher Triana. I gave this book a 2.5 out of 5 stars originally, and that was too generous. When I was going back over it and making an outline for this video, I realized that it was definitely a 2 out of 5 stars, if that. So we're gonna go with 2 out of 5 stars. Gone to See the Riverman is a book that was published in 2020. It is a tale about a woman named Lori who forms an intimate relationship with an incarcerated serial killer. Super cool, right? In an effort to get as close to him as possible, Lori agrees to go on a journey of sorts for this incarcerated serial murderer. And this journey involves her going to his hometown town. It's like in the middle of nowhere, like in the woods, up to his cabin, up the river, to retrieve like a key. And she's supposed to take this key to some unknown dude named the Riverman, which sounds really, really legit. Exactly the kind of thing just any regular person would do, right? Not only that, but she takes her adult disabled sister with her on this journey, who like Lori is the sole caretaker of. And so not only is Lori like trying to shack up with this serial killer or whatever she's trying to do, she also endangers her sister's life for this weird journey that she apparently needs to go on to win this guy over because she wants to be the girl that he loves. He's got all sorts of, like, you know, women after him that are into incarcerated people that have done terrible things, but Lori wants to be number one. I read this book as a buddy read with one of my friends who also loves to read books. We wanted to read a book together in October for our, like, spooky reading, or as we call it, like, Traumatober. And like many books that I've previously mentioned, we had found it on Horror Book Talk. I'd seen it listed as like one of the most messed up books people had ever read, and my friend was like, hey, well, do you want to read that one? And so I was like, okay, yeah, let's read that. I didn't even look into what it was about. I just bought a copy. The copy came in the mail. I read the back and I was like, oh. My friend warned me that she'd read online that it was very much like an edgelord type book and that it was going to be very like much like a shock value type book. But you know, whatever. We were curious. We can handle that kind of thing. We decided to read it. What I didn't like about this book was a lot of things. One of the main things being Lori, the main character, is a self-absorbed, deranged femcel. It's made apparent. She's trying to get close to a man who is known to brutally murder many women, but for some reason, she wants to be in on that. She also treats her sister, who I mentioned is disabled, like, kind of like garbage. Like, she takes care of her, but her thoughts about her sister and the way she feels toward her is kind of messed up. Like, I don't think she doesn't love her sister, to say the least, and that's not really chill. You do find out in the story that Lori did some really atrocious things when she was younger. Like, Lori is just as bad, in my opinion, as this serial murderer that she's trying to get close to. But Lori is just so like, woe is me, my life sucks, everything's always been difficult for me. You know, she really pities herself. And she doesn't deserve pity at all. There is nothing that she has done that you read about in the book that leads me personally to think that she deserved any sympathy whatsoever. Another thing that I disliked about this book was while I was reading it, I got the sense that a lot of the depraved language and imagery and like things that happen in the book were kind of thrown together just for the sake of shock value. There were some things that did impress me. There were things that were kind of creepy. Some of the mood and settings were unsettling. But for the most part, everything just felt like, shock value. Especially the stuff that Lori does throughout her life. Like, serial killer dude aside, the stuff that Lori does, it just felt like it was just there to be shocking, to the point where I wasn't even shocked reading it. I was mostly just like, wow, this is kind of dumb. I feel bad saying that because, like, obviously this person, like, wrote this book and put effort into writing this book and put it out there for the world, which I respect a lot. But also, I think anybody that writes a book like this is fully aware that there are going to be people that are going to not like it. Yeah, shock value. Really heavily relied on that. The things that happened in this book, to me, felt like if the bowels of 4chan erupted in a porta potty on like a hot summer day and somehow like stained all the porta potty walls in a way that like made words and then turned into this book. Like, it just was not good. So this book was absolutely the edgelord circle jerk that I'd been led to believe it would be, which is fine. I had an idea of what I was getting myself into once I read the back of the book. My last complaint about this book was that it, at least for me, was really easy to guess what was going to happen. Like, it was too easy to guess what was going to happen in this book. Within like the first 3 or 4 chapters, I had a pretty clear idea of what the Riverman was going to be like. And by like the 6th chapter, I knew exactly what every single like shocking thing was going to be throughout the book. I don't know if that says more about like me than it does the author, but I just don't like books when you can easily guess everything that's going to happen. It's kind of a bummer for me. I kept reading it and thinking like, oh no, this thing's going to happen, and then that thing happened, and I was like, oh, I bet I know how this is going to end, and that's how it ended. I just like to be surprised by books sometimes, and this wasn't very surprising for me, but also I think that going into it, hearing that it was really triggering and shocking, and that it was like an edgelord type book, for me personally, it's easy to guess what it's probably going to have in it, if those terms are used. On to See the Riverman. I didn't enjoy my trip to see the Riverman. I don't know if Lori really enjoyed her trip either, but I would still read another one of Christopher Triana's books. Alright, the last book that I am going to complain about, the #1 book that I least enjoyed. This book took me almost a month to read, and it was at a point in my life where I didn't want to DNF a book, especially if I'd purchased it and owned it. And I struggled through this book. This is the book that just made me realize I need to DNF books if I'm not enjoying them, or at least put them off for a time when like I can read them later, because like I had so many books waiting for me and I wasted so much of my time trying to get through this book. I told myself I could power through it, that it was worth it, and then almost a month later I was like, wow, you know what? I'm not doing that to myself again. And that book is The Beautiful and Damned by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I gave that book like 2.5 out of 5 stars, maybe a 3 out of 5 stars. This book was published in 1922. It focuses on a young couple who are living in the early 1900s. It shows like their courtship, like them meeting, them deciding to get married, their marriage, and this couple is really hedonistic. They really don't seem to care about anything other than like their own pleasures. There are a lot of times where they don't get along with each other at all. They're extremely selfish, not only towards each other, but just in general with life. This showcases their decline throughout their marriage, as well as their long wait and sort of like battle to get an inheritance from the main dude's grandfather. I started this book for multiple reasons. One of them is that I generally enjoy classic literature, even if it's just, you know, fiction. I think it's really interesting to read things written by people from eras past, you know, like these people, F. Scott Fitzgerald lived and died long before I came around, and I think it's interesting to sort of get a look into different eras through different people's points of view. And it's also the only, or it was, the only F. Scott Fitzgerald book that I hadn't read yet. So I didn't like this book the most out of everything that I read because it was so boring. This book was so boring that when I was going over books to put on this list, I had to Google the book to remember like anything that happened in it. I couldn't remember the names of people. I couldn't remember things that had happened. Like, it just did not stick with me whatsoever. Thought the hedonism and the toxic relationship between the two main characters was not worth 400 plus pages of writing and a month of reading. I learned that F. Scott Fitzgerald had supposedly plagiarized things from his wife, Zelda Fitzgerald. Things like journal or diary entries, things that she said. There was a lot of just things that I read and learned that made me think I didn't really know exactly what he actually had written or which of these were even original thoughts for him in that book, which definitely subtracted from it. Stealing writing or things like that isn't exactly cool and didn't make me enjoy the book anymore. Sometimes I read things about books after I read them that make me appreciate them a little bit more. This made me appreciate the book even less. So yeah, even though it was technically like a glimpse into eras past, The Beautiful and Damned, nothing about this book did it for me. I regret reading it, and like I said, it is the book that was the catalyst for me deciding that I needed to just not read books if I wasn't enjoying them. I thought there would be a reward toward the end of the book for reading it, like something that really just brought it together for me, but it was not good. Thank you so much for joining me while I picked apart some of these novels, and also thanks for joining me for like one of my first ever video reviews. This wasn't the easiest thing for me to make. It took me a while to put this together in terms of like what I really wanted to say about these books, but I think I'm starting to get the hang of things. If you enjoyed this, go ahead and hit the like and subscribe buttons to stay tuned for future book complaints. If you've read any of these books and you had different opinions or similar opinions, go ahead and leave me a comment and tell me about it. And if you read any other books in the year of 2022 that you really didn't like, leave me a comment. Tell me what they were. I genuinely want to hear all about it. I love talking about books. Like, I'm here for it. So those were the books that I did not enjoy this year. And that's all I really have to say. Bye!